He says, I have something to tell you. I said, okay, tell me. He said, in June of 1963, I was the top rifleman or shooter in the state of Texas. And this man came up behind me and said, hey, you're a pretty good shot. And I said, thank you very much. He said, I turned around and there was this businessman there with a business suit. And I said, thank you. And then he said, we've been watching you for a long time. And I said, oh, really? And then he said, yeah. Are you interested in a job? A job? And Ed said, yeah, how much does it pay? And the guy said, $2 million. And he said, whoa, that's a lot of money. What do I have to do? And he said, of course, you have to kill somebody. He said, well, who do I have to kill? He said, John F. Kennedy. And he said, hey, brother, I don't want any part of that. No,
Yeah.
that's not for me. I was flabbergasted. I said, Ed, you're telling me that in 1963, June, somebody walked up to you, offered you $2 million to kill President Kennedy, and he was just so dead serious about it. He never blinked. He just looked at me with unblinking eyes. And I said, you're telling me that? He said, yep. And this man offered you $2 million? Yep. Do you remember who he is? Yep. Are you willing to tell me who he is? Yep. I said, well, who was it? George H.W. Bush. And this wave went through my body, and I said, Ed, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you confirmed everything that I've known and believed for all these years that I've been studying and researching the JFK assassination.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I am very excited and delighted to be joined once again by my friend Robert Morningstar. Robert was one of the first guests I had on when we just had an epic episode. If you have not seen that episode, I highly recommend it. Let me remind you who this incredible man is and how busy he's been. He is a civilian intelligence analyst and an investigative journalist and a psychotherapist living in New York City. He is a specialist in photo interpretation, geometric analysis, and computer imaging. He was a New York State Regent Scholar at Fordham University, where he received a degree in psychology. He's an expert in Chinese language, history, and martial arts, and he's acknowledged as a master of Yang family Tai Chi, and he continues to teach it. At least you did up until about 2 years ago. Are you still teaching it?
I'm still teaching.
Awesome.
As
He's
often
also
as
an
I can.
FAA licensed pilot and instrument ground instructor. He's studied the UFO phenomenon and the paranormal for over 50 years. He's had countless guest stars with George Norrie on what's it called?
Coast to Coast.
Coast to Coast. You know, that's one of the many places where I kept seeing you pop up. You are a recipient of the marquee Who's Who 2020 Albert Neal Lifetime Achievement Award for your career as a civilian intelligence analyst. And he's also publisher and editor of the UFO Spotlight, radio host, the Morningstar Report. He's on Substack. You got to keep up with this guy. He's putting out a lot of very important information. So without further ado, Robert, thank you so much for coming back, brother.
Oh, it's a pleasure, really. I enjoyed that conversation that we had 2 years ago. And as I was saying, I just saw it for the first time in 2 years, and I was moved. I was on target with everything I
Yes, you
said.
were.
And in the 2 years since we had that conversation, in particular about the JFK assassination, everything I said has proven to be true. The CIA killed President Kennedy. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, along with the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, a certain rogue group of really radical people. They wanted us to go into war in Vietnam. JFK was planning to pull out of it. They wanted to continue the Cold War against the Soviet Union and Russia. And they just balked. Kennedy wanted to have peace with the Soviet Union. He wanted to have joint ventures and information sharing in science and technology and UFOs, because
he wanted the
UFOs
truth about the disclosure about
Yeah,
the
about
UFO
disclosure.
conspiracy to come
He
out?
wrote a letter on November 12th. Actually, it was
We know that,
the
too,
hotline,
right?
and
Mm-hmm.
he wrote a memo to the CIA, NASA in particular, telling them to get ready to change the program, that we were not going to build the space station. We were instead going to go to the moon, and he was planning to do a joint venture with the Russians. And
Mm.
exactly 10 days later, he was dead. But the
Wow.
planning for his assassination had begun in March, and that was called Operation Zipper. So we have the files that
Wow.
were developed or written up, typed up by the deputy director of the CIA Clandestine Operations Division, Robert Trumbull Crowley. And I guess he kept them as an insurance policy. So when he
Yeah.
was very old, in 1999, he was near death. He took the files and gave them to an author named Gregory Douglas. And Gregory
Mm.
Douglas shared them with a U.S. Marine sniper who was part of JFK's protective unit. The Marines had been assigned to protect President Kennedy, and this man, Gordon Ferry, was a principal. He was the top sniper in the Marines at the time they reformed the unit. And it's all come true. They held a what I call a kangaroo court martial for President
Yeah.
Kennedy in absentia, and they condemned John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy to death for high treason and called for a public execution. So they hired the
My God.
Chicago Mafia, and the rest is history. And it
Yeah.
was very, very occult. And here we are today, and it's now, let's see, the fourth day after the disclosure, the 80,000
Yeah.
documents, and all the proofs are popping out. I'm very happy to have lived to this day. You see, in
Yeah. I can't
1964, when the
imagine.
Warren Commission came out, Lyndon Johnson announced it, and he said, and I'm ordering that these files be sealed for 75 years. And I was mind
Wow.
boggled. We closed the files for 75 years, and I did my math. I said, that's 2039. Damn, I'll
Mm.
be 92. And I said,
Yeah.
USOB, I'm going to live to be 92 because I'm not going to die. I'm not leaving this planet until I know what happened to John F. Kennedy, my hero.
I hear you.
And so at this
I
moment, there is a masterful article on the Morningstar report, robertmorningstar.substack.com. That's now my principal avenue
Mm-hmm.
for getting information out. So if you go there, you'll see a historical analysis of the JFK assassination by Jim Scott and myself. And you'll get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as we have always
Nice.
hoped we would have. And now the documents are pouring out and show what a vast plot, what a vast conspiracy this was,
Yeah.
involving governments, foreign governments, um, many agencies. But
Yeah.
here we
And
are.
last time you were here, we discussed the incredible work you did in exposing a key element of this entire plot, with the JD Tippit body double evidence.
Oh, yes.
And, if that's a whole can of worms to open for this, but that's episode 76. If you're looking for in the Far Out with Faust, if you want to go back in time and watch it, I recommend it. And we also, of course, we got into the Bush family, which I'm actually doing a special on the Bush Clinton crime dynasty, and like a little expose that I've
Yeah.
been working on. And so, a ton of questions, but I know you've gotten into these documents, and my understanding is that for the most part, these 80,000 are not redacted. Is that accurate to say,
That's,
or is there still
yes,
some
for the
redactions?
most, yeah, they're not redacted. And
That's
we
amazing.
have, well, we have a confirmatory document that just came out, and it's an FBI, a memo, CIA memo. It's they were sharing information because they were hand in glove in the assassination. All the meetings were attended by CIA, the military, and the FBI. They also enlisted major news companies like the New York Times and the Washington Post to go along with the single gunman theory and to frame Lee Harvey Oswald. So this document is an FBI memo that says they intercepted a message from um, Cuban members of the Chicago Mafia saying, sending a message that they didn't have to worry about money anymore because they had plenty of money and they were being backed by agents of Israel. So Israel played a huge
Mm.
part in the
They
assassination
did, and
of Kennedy.
everyone. There's so many people still in denial about this. They don't want to admit that that the Mossad and Israel was a huge factor in this. And
Exactly.
anybody who researches this knows there's 101 reasons why that is absolutely not only plausible, but we know.
Well, now it's
Essentially, we know.
documented. The
Yeah.
Mossad was formed by the CIA. It was formed by James Jesus Angleton and a British agent for MI6 named Kim Philby. So the two of them, they were liaison, and together they formed Mossad. And James Jesus Angleton used the Mossad as a subdirectory or a sub-desk of the CIA. And when he wanted to knock off people for whatever reason, political reasons, um, whatever vendetta they had in Europe, they would use either Mossad or the Mafia.
And they
And
sure
now
did.
these
Yeah.
documents are coming to light, proving that J.J. Angleton not only was the director of counterintelligence, he also ascended to head the MJ-12 executive.
Wow.
So he was in
I
charge
didn't know that.
of all of the occult. And when I say occult, I'm really emphasizing the paranormal,
Yeah.
the otherworldly. And so that's he was always
Well, that's what the
suspected.
people.
He left in
Hmm.
disgrace in 1974 when they exposed the MKUltra experiments, which were being run here and in Canada. The Montauk experiments were part of it to create
Hmm.
psychic spies and programmable assassins. And
Hmm.
that's one of the uh, things that we've uncovered in the last 2 years. James Files, the self-avowed confessed assassin of President Kennedy, was taken at the age of 8 and sent to a place called Camp Hero in Montauk, New York. And it was on the
Mm.
same base where later on in the 70s and early 80s, the Montauk Project was mounted using alien technology to again develop remote viewers with psychic powers and programmable assassins. And they used a lot of people from Canada. They actually took children from Canada and enlisted them at the age of 6 and 7 at job fairs and told the parents,
Hmm.
"Oh, we're recruiting for the police and the military, and your child looks like he's uh, very talented and has the aptitudes. And if you give us your consent, we'll set him up in a program to develop him into a military officer or a policeman." So the parents of Christian Laterreur, who was actually the real name of the whistleblower Duncan Cameron,
Mm.
came forth, and he's told me the whole story. And they took children. For example, he was
Yeah.
7 years old. They put him in a car in Montreal. They drove him through New York State. They stopped at a roadside restaurant, I guess the New York State Thruway, and they gave them
Hmm.
LSD. And the
Hmm.
7-year-old boy rode all the way to Montauk, Long
Jesus.
Island, tripping his brains out. And as soon as they got there, they threw them in cages and started to terrorize them,
Jesus. What
beat
a
them,
nightmare.
brutalize them, because MKUltra was fundamentally based on trauma-based mind control.
Yes.
And split the personality, fracture the personality
Right.
through torture, and then program each personality individually. It's really quite profound.
It's
But
dark and
that's
profound.
that's what
Yeah.
the CIA was up to in 1960.
The There was a recent podcast with Dr. Jack Kruse. I don't know if you caught wind of it or if anyone has mentioned it to you, but
Excuse me, I have a
he.
little street noise. I didn't hear that, your last sentence. Would you repeat,
Oh,
please?
no problem. I was saying, you know, we talked a little bit, well, a lot about Lee Harvey Oswald in our last conversation,
Mhm.
and I've learned a lot since then, and some things have recently come out in a podcast that a young man named Danny Jones does, and he did it with this doctor, Dr. Jack Kruse, and Dr. Jack Kruse was talking about the link between Oswald and Dr. Mary Sherman,
Oh,
that
yeah.
cancer researcher
Mhm.
who was allegedly murdered. I mean, and that's detailed in the incredible book by Edward Haslam called Dr. Mary's Monkey.
Yes.
And Haslam writes that Oswald and a young prodigy called Judith Very Baker, you probably
Yes, I
heard of her.
know her. I've interviewed her.
Oh
Sure.
wow, okay. So they were actually helping Sherman develop a bioweapon to use against Castro. And I
Yes.
was wondering what she told you about that and how, how is that I mean,
Oh,
it
yes.
really resonates as true to me.
Oh, yes. I've known her for many years. For a period of time, she fled the United States and was living in Sweden in a very far removed little village. So I
Mm.
guess it's about 8 years ago. I contacted her, and she had to go to another town to set up a Skype connection so that we could do
Oh
the
wow.
interview. But yes, she was a very talented high school student and very interested in biology. And then she started
Mhm.
doing cancer research on her own in high school. And she developed a way of culturing cancer cells very rapidly so that they could do cancer research, hopefully looking for cures. But what the CIA was looking for was a way of contaminating people with cancer. And I'd remind
Yep.
people that in 1967, um, Jack Ruby was put on trial. He was convicted for murder and he was in jail. And then he wound up in a hospital and he said, I'm going to die soon. They've injected me with cancer. And we all thought he was crazy. Like,
Well,
who
didn't
did
they
they
declare
declare?
him
Pardon?
insane at one point?
Yeah, they declared him insane. Yeah, that,
Yeah, right after he met with Jolly West. Remember
yeah,
Jolly
Johnny
West,
West, who was a principal in the MKUltra
That's right. He
experiments,
was
went
real good
and
at making
interviewed him.
people
He's the one who declared him insane. But
exactly,
there's
and it
another
wasn't until
document.
after that
Yeah,
assessment, right,
yeah,
that he was declared. And people went in and they said he really is fucking
yeah,
insane. Like
sure.
he seemed to have lost it. I don't know what Jolly did or what kind of stuff he pulled, but I'm sure he used every trick he knew to try to make this
Well, he
man
didn't have to
lose it.
use any tricks. Anything he wrote was taken as, God's word
True.
as far as mental illness. Yeah. But he and Stanley Gottlieb, William
Mm,
Bryan out in California, the Manson clan was part of this.
that's
They
right.
were heavily dosed with LSD and they were set loose to start a race war. That's what they wanted in the
Yep.
1960s. And I have to say, the Manson murders really destroyed the peace and flower movement, the
That's
hippie
right.
movement,
That's
because everything was love, peace, happiness, no more war. And that was a huge threat uh,
yep.
to the plans of the military industrial complex and the CIA to jump into Vietnam for many
Mm-hmm.
reasons. And then let me tell you this, one of the principal reasons for the war in Vietnam was not the military industrial uh, development of new weapons for the next
Mm-hmm.
generation, but it was actually to ensure the flow of heroin and other drugs
That's
from
right.
the Golden Triangle to the United States. And
That's
France,
exactly what it
Charles de
was.
Gaulle, in 1967, negotiated a deal with the CIA. He went and had a meeting with the then director. Uh, and he said, listen, you've got to stay in Vietnam. A lot of our operations, government and black operations, involve funding black money. And we have to have the rivers of Vietnam to be able to access the seaports to be
Mm-hmm.
able to ship the drugs out. And if you stay in Vietnam and hold on to it, we'll be able to keep shipping the drugs out
Yep.
of the Golden Triangle, and we'll split the profits with you 50-50. So
Wow.
that was one of the principal reasons. That was Charles de Gaulle in France. So when you see the movie The French Connection with the
Mm.
late Gene Hackman,
Gene
passed
Hackman.
away
Yeah.
recently, it's absolutely true.
Under suspicious circumstances.
Well, yeah, well, he was 95.
Yeah.
And he
No,
did
I know
live
he
a
was.
long. I
But
know, 95 is not that old when we're supposed to get
no,
120.
not anymore. You
I
know,
keep saying, I'm going for the 120.
go for it. You got it. Um,
Um,
I doing this research into the Bush Clinton um, crime families, and you inevitably run headfirst into the quote war on drugs and what
yeah.
really went on. And of
Mhm.
course, you learn about Kun Sa and the Golden Triangle and the
Mhm.
fact that America was, at least in part mostly responsible for this entire, the epidemic and the war, like we created it,
Mhm.
problem reaction solution, so that we could have a war on drugs. And they all about money, money, money. And people
Yes,
don't
indeed.
realize how much the wool has been pulled over our eyes and what really went on, in
Yeah, that's
those
called
years. But you
hoodwinking in that secret
hoodwinking.
society.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The story, well, it's great. I call this the JFK torrent of truth. That the flood is going to just carry everything away and purge the swamp. It's just like
God,
the
I
dike
pray. I hope
is
so.
broken and the waters are flowing and the water's information. And my friend Victor Martinez and I, many, many years, I think we've known each other almost 20 years. And he and I in 2012 began issuing every November 22nd, we issued a huge report on the latest findings, the latest documents,
Hmm.
and it's called the JFK Torrent of Truth. And that's what we're experiencing now.
Nice. Well, we're well overdue. Um, speaking of JFK, given the evolving dynamics in the U.S. support for Israel, and I think evolving is the right word, as
Yeah,
you know, they continue this onslaught and find
yeah, we
more and more
started.
reasons to put off stopping this destruction that they're doing. Do you think that there's more room now to openly discuss the tensions that were between Kennedy and Israeli leaders before his assassination? And do you think people
Total.
are becoming more receptive to that evidence here now?
Yes, well, the alternate media was what's getting it out because uh, the mass media, the Mockingbird media, as I dubbed
Yeah.
them, the Mockingbird media, after Project Mockingbird. If people don't know
Mm-hmm.
about that, you should look it up. In the 1950s, the CIA decided to take over
Embed.
all
Yeah.
news organizations by infiltration. So they enlisted reporters, editorial managers, uh, boards of directors,
Every
uh,
major
talking heads
organization.
on television, Walter
Mm-hmm.
Cronkite, every one of them was on board as a patriotic duty, as they thought of it,
Right.
uh, you know, to hoodwink the American public. They actually got the idea from The Wizard of Oz. As you
Get out of
know,
here.
I
Really? Is that?
exposed I exposed the doctoring of the Zapruder film in 1992, 93, the 90s. That was my first contribution to the JFK assassination. And folks, when you look at the Zapruder film, if you see it alone, it's an optical illusion,
Yeah.
consciously engineered optical illusion. The um, the roll of film that Zapruder shot was 25 feet long. The remnant of the Zapruder film that we have now is only 6 feet long, which
My
gives you an
God.
idea of how much they
Yeah.
took out. And they used a very advanced form of psychology to cut and splice and join partial frames. They didn't just cut the film and join it, that it would have been too obvious. So they cut
Mm-hmm.
partial frames and measured them so that they would be in a proportion of 1 to 1.619, which is the golden ratio. And by inserting these
Wow.
partial frames, it wasn't just a cut. It was a, let's say they took away 5 feet of film, and they got the middle frame of those 5 feet, two of them, and then they cut them with one part in ratio to the other of 1 to 1.619. So when they ran that, your
Mm.
eyes couldn't pick it up. My eyes
Right.
could pick it up because I was trained in Gestalt psychology, and I'd been watching the film since they first aired part of it in
Mm-hmm.
1968. And the thing about it and seeing it in 1968, it left me with a queasy stomach. I watched the film at 7 o'clock, and at the critical point when the car passed by the sign, I thought I
Yeah.
blinked, and I went, "What? I blinked? How could I blink?"
Missed something.
Concentrating so intensely on that. And then I said, "Oh well, they'll repeat it." They used to do a 7 o'clock news report and then repeat the entire thing on videotape at 11. So I said, "Oh, okay, now I'll watch it. I'll watch it at 11, and I'll really concentrate then." So I'm right up on the television, watching it in the dark, which is the way I liked it. And I'm waiting for that part, and I'm concentrating 110%
Yeah.
because I
Eyes wide
blinked
open
7
now.
o'clock, and then
Right.
time goes by,
Not gonna miss it again.
and I
Yeah.
blinked again, and I walked
Very nice.
away, and I had a strange feeling in my gut. And this was the first time I experienced cognitive dissonance.
Wow.
Something just wasn't right. How could I blink at exactly the same moment at the in that point of the film when I was
Mm.
concentrating so intensely on it? Well, 30 years later, I found that copy of the Zapruder film that had been produced by CBS News. And when I came to that juncture where the car passes the film, they had inserted a totally black frame,
Wow.
completely blank. And the effect was to make the person watching it think that they blinked.
They blink.
So
Wow.
I, along with 20 million other people who were watching it, we weren't talking. We just sat there and I
Wow.
blinked.
That is
So everybody blinked at the same time, but nobody turned to anybody and said, "Hey, did you blink just now?" No.
right. Of
Yeah.
course not.
Yeah, I thought I blinked. No, it didn't happen. It took me 30 years to realize that the frame that they had blacked out is the most grossly edited frame in the entire
Mm.
Zapruder film. It can't be hidden because the job is so bad
Yeah.
that they joined it, and they had to use at that time they had to use a blue colored glue, and the blue glue is right there, and that was one of the first
Yeah.
splices that I discovered, and I discovered about six splices, and it's
Mm-hmm.
the film was actually shot in slow motion as well. Zapruder's camera, I have a, I had it. That these are just weird coincidences that when I was 13 years old, my father said, what do you want for Christmas? I said, Dad, I love making 8 millimeter movies.
Yeah.
Can you buy me a Bell and Howell,
No
Optronic Eye
kidding.
movie camera? He said, "Oh, sure, we'll get that. But you have to work for it."
wow.
So I had to
Yeah.
work for it, right? And I got it. So I became an expert on the Bell and Howell
wow.
Optronic movie camera, and that's the kind that Zapruder had. So when I saw the Zapruder film and started studying it in the 1990s, I was seeing signals to me, hey,
Yeah.
this is in slow motion. For example, the opening. The first optical
Yeah.
illusion of the Zapruder film is to make you believe that you saw the car turn the corner. And,
Right.
and the way they did this, it's cool, you might say.
Mm.
4 motorcycles were leading the parade, as Lee Harvey Oswald called it.
Mm-hmm.
So these 4 motorcycles were ahead of a car called the pilot car. In the
Right.
pilot car was the Dallas chief of police, Chief Jesse Curry,
So cool.
and members of the FBI and the Secret Service. They were going ahead, checking out the scene, and we would think checking out the scene to see if there was any threat, but they were
Yeah,
actually
we know what they
checking out the
were.
scene that everyone was in position.
Right,
So the next part of the parade was another group of motorcycle cops that were the entourage of President Kennedy and his limousine. So the first four motorcycle men come into the screen. You see them moving across Houston Street. One of them
right.
keeps going. Three of them make the turn, and you're watching them come down. One, two, three. When the third
Mm-hmm.
one is in the center of the frame, they cut the film and substituted one of the motorcycle cops from the second entourage. So your eye thinks you're looking at the same cop that you just saw turn the corner. At that moment, when you're looking at the the, uh, the substitute, the car just jumps into the
That's right.
scene, and your eye is made to believe that you saw the car turn the corner, but it was only teleported. Because if you go to the
Right,
frame before, when the third motorcycle cop is in the center of the frame, there's no limousine there. In the next one,
right.
there's a motorcycle cop, and your eye's following that, and the limousine is there right in the middle of the street. And that's
Yeah,
where they began cutting out things. What they cut out at that point was that Greer, who was driving the president's limousine,
yeah.
overshot Elm Street. Elm Street
He
is
overshot
at
his
an
mark,
angle
right?
that's more than 90 degrees, or I should say
Mm-hmm.
less than 90 degrees. So it's very, very sharp. And Greer picked up the service road, which was where the delivery road for the Texas School Book Depository. So he thought that was
Mm-hmm.
Elm Street. And then as it was going by, he saw it and he whipped the car around, and his right front tire hit the curb, rode up,
Mm.
came down, and he was shaken up, and then he positioned himself back in the middle of the road. So in
Where he
order
was
to
supposed to
hide
be.
that
Yeah.
fact, the film was that was just the beginning.
Yeah, that was just the beginning. I mean,
That
and
was the
so
beginning.
in our first episode, you really go into a lot of detail, and we showcase some of the other
Oh
pretty
yes,
big discoveries you made about that film. I highly recommend it.
yes, I do
You
too.
know,
I was on
yeah,
that day,
and
folks. I'd been
you
waiting.
were
I'd been
you were
waiting 50 years, or more, to be able to.
that's so awesome and just amazing for me to hear because you've done a lot of interviews, and so to hear you say that mine was one of your favorite is very hard, very touching, and,
Well,
and
it's
I,
from my
I
heart. I really mean it.
I appreciate that, brother. Um,
Honestly,
you
I
know,
was upwelled. I was upwelled with emotions and
hmm
almost tears of joy. And I said to myself, if I died today, that would stand and stand forever.
absolutely, it
That's the way I felt.
really does. And we start talking about one of the revelations you made on my podcast that was, of course, as I mentioned to you in the middle of it, didn't come as a surprise to me because I had been studying. I had already started way back then studying the Bush family and what they were about, what they were doing, and the fact that he was in Dallas, and all this stuff. And so when you told me about that man who came to you and talked to you about being approached at a firing range,
Oh, yes.
that was a huge,
Ed Grimsley. Let's remember
yeah,
him, Ed Grimsley. He held
Ed
that
Grimsley.
secret for so many years,
Imagine,
practically close to 50 years. And in San Francisco at the secret space program breakaway civilization conference, he took me aside and I have to talk to you.
yeah.
Could we have lunch? And if you want me to tell the story, I can tell it very briefly. He asked me to
Sure,
have
go
lunch
ahead.
with him at this big, I think it's a really historic conference. It's really what uh, broke broke down the wall and really initiated the UFO disclosure movement.
Hmm.
So he says, let's have lunch. So I said, sure. So we went over to this big table. Nobody was there. We sat down, and two people came over and said, can we sit with you? And I said, of course, yeah. And he said, excuse me, no, I really have to talk to him privately. And I said,
Mm.
I realized, well, this is serious.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm sorry. So he said to me, I know who you are. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I know who you are. Yes, you mean my work on the JFK assassination? He said, yes. And he said, oh, okay. He says, I have something to tell you. He said, okay, tell me. He said, in June of 1963, I was the top rifleman or shooter in the state of Texas. I'd won every shooting contest, including the Texas State Championships. And while I was
Mm.
at a shooting range practicing, this man came up behind me and said, hey, you're a pretty good shot. And I said, thank you very
Recruiting.
much. And he said, I turned around, and there was this businessman there with a business suit, and he said that to me, that I'm a pretty good shot. I said, thank you. And then he said, we've been watching you for a long time. I said, oh, really? And then he said, yeah. Are you interested in a job? And he said, oh, a job? He said, oh,
Mm-hmm.
sure. So the guy, he said, he gave me his card, and it was an office in Houston. He told me to call up the office and make an appointment. So I did so. So he was in Dallas, so he had to go to Houston for this.
Mm-hmm.
So he made the appointment. He went there, and he was greeted by a secretary, ushered into the businessman's office. And again, the businessman started off with the same phrase. He said, yeah, you're a pretty good shot. We've been watching you
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. He said, okay, thank you. And he said, are you interested in a job? And Ed said, yeah, how much does it pay? And the guy said, $2 million. And he said, whoa,
Wow.
that's a lot of money. What do I have to do? And he said, of course, you have to kill somebody. He said, well, who do I have to kill? He said, John F. Kennedy. And he said,
Wow.
hey, brother, I don't want any part of that. No, no,
Yeah.
that's not for me. So, they did the wink, the nod, and shook hands. And he said, okay, obviously,
Wow.
you're never going to talk to anybody about this,
Right.
right?
Who's going to
That
believe
was
you
understood.
anyway?
That was understood. And so
Yeah.
I said to him, I was flabbergasted. I said, Ed, you're telling me that in 1963, June, somebody walked up to you, offered you $2 million to kill President Kennedy, and he was just so dead serious about it. He never
Mm.
blinked. He just looked at me with unblinking eyes. And I said, you're telling me that? And he said, yep. And I
Yep.
said, and and this man offered you $2 million? Yep. Do you remember who he is? Yep. Are you willing to tell me who he is? Yep. And I said, well, who was it? George H.W. Bush. And
Mommy.
this wave went through my body, and I said, Ed,
So
thank you. Thank you from the
yeah.
bottom of my heart, because you confirmed everything that I've known and believed for all these years that I've been
Mm-hmm.
studying and researching the JFK assassination. And there was a relief that just went through him
Yeah.
too. He had gotten
Yeah. I'm
this
sure. I mean,
load, this
finally
load of.
getting off that.
So then I started to tell that story. I told him, Ed, you're giving me this in confidence. I know it's dangerous. I
Mm-hmm.
promise you, I will never reveal this to anyone without your permission,
Right.
unless I know that you have passed away. So he passed away a few years ago. And I said, this is the time. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Ed Grimsley was a hero. And he, in order to escape when the assassination happened, he knew he was in danger. So he joined the U.S. Air Force,
Wow.
and he served in the U.S. Air Force, and he got all involved in UFOs. He used to have
Oh wow.
tours in California with night vision glasses and take people out on the California coast to watch space battles that were going on over the
No
California.
kidding.
Yeah,
No kidding.
he's got
I
videos
heard
of it.
about that.
He had videos of it. It was phenomenal.
Truth is so
May
much
he rest
stranger
in
than
peace. Ed
fiction.
Grimsley, another American
Ed
hero.
Grimsley, patriot, hero, absolutely. Um, you know, we were talking about. Well, I mentioned truth is stranger than fiction. The Montauk Project is a fascinating little subject because, there's a lot of kind of modern day shows that were very much inspired by different events that came from or had to do with the Montauk Project. Like Stranger Things comes to mind
Sure.
with the kids and the experiments, and then like the
Oh,
Russians were
this
doing
is
their
where the
thing.
whole
And
adrenochrome thing started, my friend. It's
oh,
really
is it?
horrible. The, the,
Was it the
mo-
Montauk
the
Project?
television series, The Time Tunnel, The Time Tunnel is based on the Montauk Project.
Yeah. Do you know Stranger Things? That Netflix show? It's a big hit.
No, I quit Netflix
No,
when
I
they
don't blame
hired
you.
Susan Rice.
I'm just wondering
When
if
they
you had
hired
heard about it.
Susan Rice and Obama to be producers,
Yes.
I said,
My God.
not for me.
God help us.
Yeah, that's when it went south, as they say.
Yeah. But
So,
oh, you know what? Just to follow up on my previous question, regarding Israel, we did talk about the documentation, but you know, there's a lot of controversy, and that's a hot topic right now as far as, people don't really want to. There's an apathy that seems to be in this country because of the conflicting religious, ethnic beliefs that are involved in whether you should, whether this is it could possibly be justified what they're doing. In my eyes, it's really clear cut. You just don't
well, it's a huge con
indiscriminately kill
job.
people.
It's a
Yeah, it
religious
is.
con job that's been pulled on the American people. And I'll tell
Yep.
you, quite frankly, Zionist Christianity is a heresy.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ did not worship Yahweh. In
That's
fact,
right.
he denounced him. He denounced the God of the Pharisees as the devil. Read the gospel, he says to them, if you love the Father, you would love me because I proceed from the Father, but you don't love me. That's because you are of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer and a liar from the beginning, and when he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he's the father of it.
Mm.
That is not an idle statement.
No,
So,
it is not.
yeah, so what Jesus came to do is he overthrew a violent, wrathful, jealous, tyrannical God who demanded human sacrifice, and he
Yahweh.
presented God the Father, the Heavenly Father, the, the Father who loves his children and doesn't
Yeah.
want to sacrifice them and receive, burnt offerings, which is what Holocaust means. And
Mm-hmm.
so this sect, it's actually a sect of Baal and Moloch
That's right.
worshippers, hijacked Judaism. And several other heresies infused themselves into Judaism, in particular
Mm-hmm.
Sabbateanism in 1666. Sabbatai Tzvi, or Tzevi, some people say, Sabbatai Tzvi.
Mm-hmm.
He said he proclaimed himself the Messiah, and then he said that he was changing the law, and he started preaching something called redemption through sin, and he reversed the Ten Commandments. So Barry Shamish, my late friend, wonderful, a wonderful researcher,
Yeah.
religious scholar. He educated me on this, and he wrote
Mm.
several books on the subject. And he was counseled by a Jewish rabbi named Rabbi Marvin Entelman, who warned him about the real nature of labor Zionism, which
Mm.
is an atheistic, materialistic, political
Yep.
ideology that hijacked the religion and has cowed its followers into
Yep.
silence and submission. So,
And confused many of the Christians,
oh yeah, the
particularly on the,
deception of the Christian community
you
and
know,
fundamentalists started over 100 years ago when,
yep, right around the time of the Balfour Declaration. Go
yeah,
figure.
it's an interesting coincidence, but they hired a minister, a pastor named Strong, and to write a concordance to the Bible, and that's
Hmm.
where he confabulated this
Yeah.
idea that uh, Israel
Yeah.
and the God that the Old Testament worshipped was the same God that Jesus preached, and they
That's right.
fooled a lot of people. But fortunately, a lot of pastors, a lot of uh, Christian pastors, priests, religious scholars have come to their senses, and they're warning people. We're being
Yeah.
lured into a death trap. Religion is being
Indeed.
used to set humanity up for a culling. And all of it
Hmm.
is one big package: the vaccines, the exposure to toxic materials in our foods, the chemtrails. It goes on and on.
It does.
But
Yeah, I
we
tell
have
people all the time.
awakened just in time.
Thank God. I tell people that if you're trying to understand what's happening, you got to realize you can't have a new world order if the old one is still standing. So the destruction and the poison and the toxins and everything, this seemingly endless need to keep a war going and keep the fingers on the buttons. It's all part of this agenda, and if it seems
Certainly.
counterproductive when they do certain things, it's because that counterproduction is equal to destruction. And so they're all about revving the engines and hitting the brakes and doing things that seem crazy because it's about the destruction of nations.
Yes.
But
Well, I've said
back,
that they use our patriotism against us. You know, when
absolutely.
the Kennedy assassination happened, Johnson was insinuating it was the Russians, and if they didn't go along with the story, we might have nuclear war with the Russians. So
That's
everybody
right.
was
That's what they
counting.
told the Warren Commission, right? Essentially,
Yeah, he
that
stacked.
everyone's life depended on them saying it was Lee Harvey Oswald because we don't want to have to go to nuclear annihilation with the Russians.
Yeah. Well, Johnson was a very violent man, and he was
Hmm.
very coercive. He would actually attack, grab people and smack them around and stand on their
Yeah.
shoes and shake them around. He was a very violent man. He actually had his own sister killed because she was becoming
Damn.
an embarrassment to him politically. His sister Josephina was a party girl, used to
Hmm.
like to go around drinking and dancing and partying with guys. And so he saw that as a threat to his ambitions. So he had his henchman, Mac
Jesus.
Wallace, kill her.
M-
And there's a
Mac
list of
Wallace
about
was a
18
psychopath.
people, 18 people that, including John F. Kennedy. He was part of it. He
Right.
was
Oh yeah, I
he
know.
was
He was
in on
part
the
of it.
plot. He didn't hatch it completely
No.
himself, but he was enlisted and told, this is going to go
Yeah.
down. The the court martial
Oh,
has
of course.
declared death on John F. Kennedy. He betrayed our country. He's colluding with the Russians. Where does that, boy, does that sound familiar? He was colluding with the Russians,
Yeah, sure
They pull
does.
out all of these um, standard operating procedures from a playbook. And like, what can we do
To
with
just
Trump? Oh,
dust
yeah,
them off and use them
collusion.
again.
Yeah, it's a playbook. It's a
It
playbook.
is. And people don't know. And because they don't know, they don't recognize the plays. Until you learn the history and understand the playbook, you just keep thinking these random events are happening. If you
Sure.
knew what Operation Northwoods was, 9/11 was a no-brainer. But people don't understand what it read under Operation Northwoods, what the proposals were that came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Kennedy. And Kennedy, of course, said, "No,
No,
no,
you're
no, no."
fired.
You
He
know,
didn't just say
yeah,
no. He said, no, you're fired. Get
yeah.
out. Yeah, Lemnitzer, General Lyman
It's
Lemnitzer,
that's right.
chairman of the
That's
Joint
right.
Chiefs of Staff. Mr. President, we could have a, a bomb in Miami that would
Mm-hmm.
kill some of our citizens and blame it on Castro.
Cuba.
Another
Mm-hmm.
possibility is that we could blow up an airliner carrying
Fly
American
airliners. Yep.
students to Cuba, blame it on
Yeah, and
Castro.
it even said, we'll make sure only a few college kids are on the plane. I'm like, what the fuck? Why would you
Yeah, yeah, what the
like? What do you have against college kids? My God, man. Like what
yeah.
the
Well, actually,
crazy man.
they did blow up an airliner. They did blow
Mm-hmm.
up a Cuban airliner, and I hate to say it, but the same man that shot President Kennedy from the grassy knoll was uh, a constant assassin,
Mm.
and he set charges on an airplane. These files are, the treasure trove that's coming out.
Yeah.
People are
Yeah.
releasing it. James Files set up the bomb that um, killed a whole bunch of Cuban
Mm.
and international tourists who were flying on a Cuban airliner. And he also was involved in political assassinations in South America and even in Washington, D.C., dealing with the
Sure.
country of Chile, the overthrowing of the government of Chile under Allende. But they killed not only Allende, they killed an officer named Letelier. He was bombed
Mm.
in Washington, D.C. So this is the way they were operating. And Johnson, he, I always say, uh, even the most ignominious villain wants to tell the truth, and
Right.
he will let it out in one way or another. And
Right.
Johnson had an interview with Walter Cronkite in the early 70s, just before he died. He said, I can't help but think
Mm.
that we were running a murder incorporated in the Caribbean in the
You think?
1960s. Like we, meaning the U.S.
Yeah.
government, was running a murder incorporated in the Caribbean in the 1960s. Now, Murder Incorporated is the name given to a particular faction of the Mafia that was knocking off people all over the place in the 30s and 40s. And then what he was giving a hint was that the CIA had enlisted the Mafia to
That's right.
conduct these operations. We were running a murder incorporated in the
Yeah.
Caribbean in the 1960s. Yeah, and
Indistinguishable.
then you were part of it.
That's
You were
right.
directing it. So,
Part and parcel. We mentioned Jolly West and MKUltra, and you mentioned Charles Manson, and I recently did a special on the Oklahoma City bombing, which the only reason I think people, I mean that the only reason why it's not more widely covered because it was such a sloppy dress rehearsal for 9/11. But the fascinating thing about McVeigh was
mhm.
that who did they fly in to do his little psychological interview? Jolly West was
Yeah,
one. It was the last things that he did. They made sure that he was the one who was talking to Timothy. But it's just, I mean,
I don't think McVeigh was executed. Actually, I think that was a fake execution.
you think? I mean,
Yeah,
I know he wasn't the one who. He was another Lee
he
Harvey.
was
He was
part of
what?
it. He was part of it. Do you know about
Yeah.
the person that was buried in the casket? There are three legs in the casket because
No.
John Doe, remember John Doe number one, John Doe number two, that guy got blown up in the explosion. Pieces of him. They found the leg
No
and they didn't
shit.
know what to do with it. They said, well, let's stick it in this coffin with this person, and they buried it. My friend Roy Schaefer, another really well-known and dedicated JFK assassination researcher, he actually took a bus from Dayton, Ohio to Oklahoma City. And he said to
Wow.
me, he said, Robert, you can't believe it. I think that thing was a small nuke. That explosion blew the
It
roofs
looked huge.
off houses for half a mile around. Uh, and why did they blow it up? Well, because all of the documents relating
That's
to
right. The
Waco,
water,
the
what a,
Waco massacre conducted by Bill Clinton, were
mm-hmm.
stashed in the Murrah
And the
Federal.
Mena, Arkansas, the
Oh
files
yeah,
on
yeah.
on
So,
on Clinton and Bush and the Rose law firm.
mhm.
It was all there. It was all there, and
Yes.
and Herbert was not gonna let. I mean, I in my special I showcased the fact that they literally held up rescue operations so they could send in, the feds to make sure those documents were either in pieces and burned or pulled out. And so they were pulling, there was people in the rubble dying, and they were pulling out filing cabinets and making sure everything was. And the rescue workers on the team were said, what is going on? Why aren't we allowed in? They said, these papers are so important that no one gets rescued until they get pulled out. That's what they told them.
That's amazing.
I have this eyewitness testimony. It's just
Well, you've done your homework, man.
unbelievable.
So kudos
It's
to you.
crazy.
I'll tell you,
Thank
the
you.
reason I don't believe that McVeigh was executed was that several years later, this video came out of a fellow who was doing a documentary at an army base, and he went in with his camera into this personnel carrier, and the guy in the back was McVeigh working
Really?
some odd job. Yeah.
It
And I
seems like a
saw it,
loose end, and
and
they
one of
would.
the things I studied was Chinese physiognomy, face reading,
Mm-hmm.
and what they're doing, facial recognition with AI now. That actually was a very highly developed skill, form in China,
Mm-hmm.
both for diagnostics, for medicine and diagnosing illness, and for well, fortune telling, reading a person's fate. So I was trained by the foremost expert, Dr. Timothy Marr, in 1977 in facial recognition. There were 78 to 80 points on the face
Wow.
alone that once you know them, you can read them. And there's a particular geometry, a
Mm.
relationship, geometric relationship. If we do points of the chin and the cheek, point of the cheeks to the
Sure.
nose, the cheek to the brow, you think, and the cheek to the chin, it creates a, a geometric form. And that's almost like a fingerprint, and you
Yeah.
learn to see the position of the ears relative to the level of the eyes, the top of the ear level to the brow, furrows
Yeah.
on the lips, a smile or frown marks. And I have to say, I took that very seriously. I mastered it. So that's how I was able to identify the JFK double in Bethesda as
Tippet.
being J.D. Tippett. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Yeah. And I'm
so
sure they're taking that information, and I'm sure yeah, like
But
you
that
said, they're
plot
using
of
it to.
using a double, a body double, that's
Yeah.
as old as the hills.
Oh, I know. Yeah,
It's in
for sure.
Shakespeare. It's in Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm. That's
Uh,
right. It is.
Measure for measure.
That's
Yeah.
right. I remember.
They substitute the heads of one guy for another to save the good guy,
Right.
supposed to be executed by a jealous official. Yes,
That's right. I
it's
remember that
old.
play.
And
So
Hitler had
you and I.
several doubles. Let's talk about who's at the core of this. This was the paperclip Nazis. The
Mm,
paperclip Nazis were brought into the United States to teach our fledgling intelligence service how they did it. They had a network already established deep into the Soviet Union. The Germans had
yeah.
been spying on Russia since the 1920s, but actually when Hitler took over in 33, because he was so anti-communist, they really fanned out and they established a whole network of spies and moles. So at the end of the war, when they were captured, they preferred to be prisoners of war under Americans because they knew if the Russians got them, they would just be
Oh,
instantly
that's it.
executed. They know no
That's right.
deals, no bargains, no
No.
negotiating with Nazis. So Werner von Braun and the rocket scientists and Reinhard Gehlen and the spy apparatus both surrendered to the Americans, as they call them,
Mm-hmm.
the Americans. And
Mm-hmm.
they made a deal to exchange their rocket and science technology and their entire spy network and make it part of the new CIA. And that's why the
Wow.
CIA is called Central Intelligence Agency and not United States Intelligence Agency. Because in the
Wow.
contract that Reinhard Gehlen negotiated with the U.S. Army, it says, it stipulates a couple of things. One of them is they have to be funded with monies that do not appear on the congressional register so they could run black operations. But then
Mm,
the most telling one, it says, it is understood that we don't work for the Americans. We work with the Americans. Because if we worked for the Americans, we would be looked upon as quislings. Quisling is a European word for Benedict Arnold. That's a traitor. That was a
mm.
Norwegian puppet that Hitler established in Norway to run Norway under the Nazi regime. So Victor Quisling. Quisling is synonymous with uh, Benedict Arnold. So, and it says, if the interests of Germany and the United States should ever diverge, it is understood that our first allegiance is to Germany. That's right there in the
Wow.
contract. And that contract was
Wow.
negotiated by the U.S. Army with Reinhard Gehlen, as well as with Werner von Braun. And so it was kept secret from the President of the United States. And only after the contract was signed was it presented to Truman as a fait accompli, a done deal. Now,
Hmm.
here's another thing that I've discovered since our conversation 2 years ago. What is the New World Order? What is their real name? Well,
Hmm.
the real name of the New World Order is the New World Order. It came into being as an idea by penned by H.G. Wells, the science fiction writer who wrote
Oh
War of
yeah.
the
I
Worlds and The
remember the
Shape of
company that
Things to
he
Come.
kept. Yeah.
He wrote a book in 1938 that was called New World Order, and it proposed a global government based on socialism. So this book became the vogue, the
Mm-hmm.
literati and the intelligentsia in England said, oh, this is a wonderful idea, world
Mm-hmm.
government run by an elite of intellectuals and scientists, meaning
Wealthy.
us.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a great thing
exactly.
to work for. So World War II came and went, that interrupted that. But that book came to the United States, and the Eastern establishment, the intelligentsia, the literati, the elite, said,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is a great idea, let's form a
Yep.
world government. Here they called it a world federation.
Hmm.
The war came, stunted that, but immediately after the war, the idea that had been seeded was the United Nations. So they organized the
Right.
United Nations
You got the
to
League of the
for
League
global
of Nations,
government.
which of course, yeah.
But
What?
here's the key. They formed a party in the United States that was called the World Federalist Party. And
No
this
shit.
World Federalist Party had a presidential candidate in 1948, and his name was Cord Meyer. And he ran for president against Thomas Dewey and Harry Truman. Of course, he lost. The
Mm-hmm.
CIA recruited a known socialist communist political candidate named Cord Meyer,
They're still doing stuff like
the
that.
head who had the agenda, the New World Order, in 1950, and they put him in charge of MKUltra. So
Wow.
when the candidate of the New World Order became the director of MKUltra, he brought in
Mm-hmm.
his retinue of political cronies into the CIA, and the global agenda of the New World Order became the policy, the uh,
Yep.
the agenda of the CIA. The CIA is the
Kissinger.
New
Yeah.
World Order.
Absolutely. Yep. That's an arm of it. Kissinger was the embodiment of it. I mean, and America's foreign policy was shaped by this insane agenda.
Yeah, and that's
But
where we have this merger after the war. As hard as it may be to believe, we had a merger of Nazism, socialism, the
mm-hmm.
Mossad, the CIA, and the Mafia as the enforcement arm.
Yep,
And that marriage,
that's it.
there was a first marriage of um, U.S. intelligence services with the Mafia happened in 1943 when we invaded Sicily. They got Lucky Luciano, who was in jail, to help them out. He
That's
said, "We
right.
need people.
They got him
We're
out,
going to
right?
conquer
That's right.
Sicily, and when we
We're
take
gonna
over
need.
towns,
We're
we have
gonna
to
need.
put people in charge that we can trust.
That's right.
And who can we trust?" So he gave him a list of all the mafia dons in Sicily. So
Mm-hmm.
they'd get rid of the fascists that Mussolini had in power, and they'd set up a mafia don as the
Yep.
mayor in Sicily. And
Sure.
so the Israelis actually hired a guy named Otto Skorzeny. He was the top commando, Hitler's commando, who rescued Mussolini from prison on a mountaintop with
Mm.
paratroopers. So they enlisted him to kill an Egyptian hired German scientist who was working on an Egyptian atom bomb. So
Hmm.
Mossad hired Otto Skorzeny uh, to knock him off, and he did so.
Wow.
And Skorzeny was running assassination operations in Europe out of an office in Madrid, where he was an engineer and an architect. But what he was engineering and architecturing were political assassinations. And so he had a network in Europe, and he had an assassination network in the United States composed of the
Hmm.
Mafia. And it's just an amazing coincidence. We found out last year or 2 years ago that Otto Skorzeny was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963,
Mm,
out on a
that's right.
hunting trip with D.H. Berg, the man who owned the Texas School Book Depository, where they set up Lee Harvey Oswald to be the patsy.
Wow.
This is the torrent of truth.
Yep.
This is how it
Um,
goes. Connecting the
got,
dots, as it's
everyone
popular.
got to subscribe to the Torrent of Truth on uh,
Yeah.
and catch up with it. Yeah.
RobertMorningstar.substack.com. Go there today. You won't be
Um,
disappointed.
Robert,
Yes.
so we've been talking about mind control a little bit, and I think it's insane that people actually believe that this whole notion of mind control ended when the CIA was outed about it. But one of the people who I enjoy listening to, a very controversial figure. People think what they want about him, but I met him and I have a lot of respect for him. His name is Dr. Stephen Greer, and he's been he was an emergency doctor for 30 years, but he's also been at the forefront of the disclosure movement for a long time. And he was recently talking about these deep black ops, and this illegal world super government which recruits people, and it's coming out now through whistleblowers that the recruiting that's going on is mostly women and children from crisis torn areas, and they're taking them against their will, and they're training them to use their consciousness to connect with extraterrestrial craft and technology. And I'm
Yes.
wondering, you know, because I know that you have a lot of knowledge about the secret space program, and you're plugged into that community, even more so than I am. And I'm wondering what your thoughts about those claims. I mean, for me, it seems absolutely like, of course they are. This is what they do. This is what
This
they've
is what
been
the,
doing.
yeah.
But
The,
what are your thoughts on these claims? And have
they're
you ever
true.
encountered anything?
They're true.
Yeah.
And it's gotten even worse now because I pointed out to people that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, this was an in house technology, mind control, uh,
Hmm.
trauma based mind control. And what happened was these military and intelligence officers who were privy to this information, this knowledge, left the service. And when they left the service, they went into corporate affairs. They took that knowledge with them, and they started to apply that knowledge to commercial advertising.
Mm.
And they're using the same techniques of subliminal seduction, um, suggestion,
Hmm.
hypnosis, uh, post hypnotic suggestion
Yeah.
to
Very powerful.
entrain the general public through television commercials. Why do you think
Television.
that the
Yep.
Super Bowl commercials are so popular? They hype them up, you know?
Yep.
That
Oh yeah.
subliminal message is coming right through
You have people who tune into the Super Bowl just to
just for
see
the
this
commercials, you know?
commercials. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
how crazy is that?
Yeah.
That's
It is.
wild. I mean, that's how effective
Yeah.
they
The
are.
other part is this human trafficking part. The
Yes.
Montauk Project was the beginning of the adrenochrome industry. They were
Mm.
torturing these children, men, boys and girls, sacrificing them, taking their blood, and that's where the organ harvesting and the adrenochrome harvesting began.
Wow.
And it is absolutely true. And so that's another revenue stream for
Hmm.
black operations. When you talked about Stephen Greer when
Yeah.
he did the June 2023
The
conference
press
down in
conference.
Washington.
Yes. Yes.
Sergeant Michael Herrera, the Marine
I
who
know
was in
exactly
the
who you're talking about.
jungle and saw the flying saucer
He,
hovering over the treetops, and he saw the platform being lifted up, carrying Humvees that had
that's right.
uh, weapons, cases for weapons, and then human trafficking,
That's right.
cages,
That's
with people. And then it just, and it was gone.
yep.
I believe him 100%. And very brave
All you have
man.
to do is listen to him, and and you tell him, if you're a discerning human being and you listen to this soldier tell you what happened, you try and detect the lie, because in my opinion, you won't detect a syllable of untruth in this man. It's a miracle he's alive to tell the tale. It's a miracle that somehow, that for whatever reason, they slipped through the cracks. They let those guys go because they didn't feel like knocking off a whole, platoon of Green Berets that
Actually,
happened to
U.S.
wander
Marines,
onto
I
them.
believe.
Though
The
they were
U.S.
Marines,
Marines.
yeah.
They're very
Um,
particular about that.
yes, yes, that's true. I gotta be, I gotta be mindful. But I mean, you can see that testimony, and
Yeah.
it's a
And other
remarkable.
testimony, I think he sat down with
Sean
several
Ryan,
other people. I
yeah.
don't know if he was with Joe Rogan, but he made the rounds and he's told the story. It's very consistent and it's totally
Hmm.
credible. Uh,
Yeah.
it's been happening all around the world. And this is what has to, I think President Trump is working day and night to bring it to a halt. One of the reasons they worked so hard to prevent his reelection is that he was going gangbusters, on underground facilities and
Right.
uh, freeing children. And now a lot of independents, American patriots, are doing the same thing. I may have
Right.
one of these patriots on my program, Craig Sawyer, has been
Nice.
recommended to me. He goes in and rescues children. They find out where they're being held.
Wow.
Children and women, primarily. Sex trafficking is one revenue stream, and then
Hmm.
adrenochrome and organ harvesting is the other. And that's the main reason that Joe Biden, all right, that's my nickname for the Manchurian candidate, Joe Biden, was so, deeply rooted in money
Hmm.
laundering that was going on in Ukraine. Ukraine I call Ukraine the devil's playground under
Mm.
Zelensky and the oligarchs. That was the
Hmm.
center of European drug trafficking, money laundering, organ harvesting, adrenochrome uh, harvesting.
Right.
And they wanted to just keep that going forever. And thank God for the Russians, folks. The Russians
Yeah.
are not the Soviets. Russia is not a
No.
communist nation. Russia is a Christian nation. Putin has elevated the Christian faith as the official religion of Russia.
Hmm.
They're villainizing Putin. Do you know that Putin gave refuge to 50,000 white South Africans who had to escape because of the
No, I
white
didn't know that.
genocide that's being conducted against the white farmers and the white population of South Africa?
No, I didn't. I mean, I heard the rumblings, but I didn't know. No, of course not, because they don't give Putin any press that would make him seem decent, you know.
Yeah.
But,
Well, let me
um,
just say this plainly. I dedicated my life to resolving the mysteries of the murder of my childhood hero, John F. Kennedy. And
mhm,
when this thing started to percolate in Ukraine, and I learned of the biological weapons laboratories that the
yep,
Pentagon and the State Department had set up in Ukraine right along the Russian border, working on gain of function
mhm.
bioweapons targeting the Slav gene, right? Russians are
Wow.
Slavs, Eastern Europeans are Slavs, Poles are Slavs. So they were targeting the Slav gene, and this was an existential threat to Russia. And I said to people, that situation in 2021, going into 2022, Putin was facing the same crisis that John F. Kennedy was facing with the nuclear missiles in Cuba. It was an existential threat then to the United
Yep.
States. And he had to step in and he had to stop it and have those missiles removed. Well, Putin warned them and told them over and over, you can't do this, you can't do
Yes, he
this.
did.
You can't keep conducting a genocide on ethnically Russian people in Luhansk and Donetsk. right? And that's what, from 2014 to 2022, the Ukrainian army was murdering people in droves in Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk. So there was a plebiscite, and the people of Luhansk, Donetsk, and Crimea voted because they are Russians. Right? And
Right.
these parts were Russia until 60 years ago when Nikita
That's
Khrushchev
right.
transferred them to Ukraine to facilitate the paperwork and the bureaucracy of having to ship out um, food, grain, and oil through Ukraine. But it's always been Russian. So
That's right.
Putin found out that Zelensky and the Ukrainian army were planning a massive attack on February 24th. So on
Hmm.
February 23rd, he did a preemptive strike to stop this massive assault that the Ukrainian army was planning to pull off the following day. So I say that Putin was facing the same situation that John F. Kennedy was facing in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And
Yeah.
he had to act to
He
protect his
and
people.
he. It's
One
not
from
like
the
he didn't.
genocide, the second one from
Yeah.
the biological warfare attack, from 46 bioweapons lab that the Pentagon and the State
46.
Department admitted they had there now,
That's
with the
right.
help of
Oops.
Hunter Biden,
Of
right?
course.
Of
Yeah.
course.
And people don't realize how tied together it is because it seems like, oh, that would be too obvious. Well, the arrogance that these people have walked around with their entire career, criminals and politics, they are arrogant. They know that in many ways they are above the law, unless they really, really kind of Jeffrey Epstein themselves into a situation, But other than that, look at Clinton. I mean, like, just look at Bill Clinton's life. Look what he did in Arkansas. I mean, the man, you could not have been guiltier of more crimes than he was, and he just found a way to continue to just sweep it under the rug. Declare the two gunshot wounds to the back of the head as suicide, one after the next.
Yeah.
It's just it really begs the
Well, it's
question, like,
because they
what?
control the information until
Yeah,
you and I and all of our friends in the
that's right.
alternate media, really got to work and expanded our network, that they had a monopoly on
Hmm.
truth, right?
Right.
Walter Cronkite, everybody, oh, Walter Cronkite was okay. No, he was a co-conspirator in the
Of
cover-up of
course.
the murder of President Kennedy. I'm going to tell it to you right now. I loved Walter Cronkite. I thought, he was the most honest man on television, but now I know. In
Yeah.
fact, if you look at the very first broadcast that Walter Cronkite made about the JFK assassination, he reads a report from Dallas, and he said President Kennedy was coming down this Elm Street in his limousine uh, when the fusillade broke out. Fusillade.
Mm.
A fusillade is something that we use in terms of a firing squad. It does not mean one shot or one, two, three.
Right.
A fusillade is a barrage of
That's
bullets,
right.
all fired at the same time to execute someone. And
It's a
that's the
Freudian
word
slip
that
there.
Walter Cronkite used. Then Dan Rather, who got to see the uncut Zapruder film because CBS was negotiating with Zapruder
Hmm.
along with Time Life Incorporated, vying to buy the
Right.
product. So he got to see it. And there are three reports that he did. And in the first report, he tells the truth. He said President Kennedy was shot. Governor Connolly turned around like that, reached back,
Hmm.
and that's when Governor Connolly was shot. He said he saw the blood on his
Yeah.
chest. And then they got to him, and each time his arm got, the first time it was really long because apparently President Kennedy was shot. He stood up and he said, "Oh my God, I've been shot." And then
Yeah.
he
I've been
fell down
shot.
and he actually slipped off the seat. And Connolly turned around and helped him back onto the seat. So he had to reach far back with that big, long,
Right.
John Connolly arm. So as you watch Dan Rather go through these three reports, you see him turn a little less and reach a little less,
Mm.
covering up. Dan
Wow.
Rather. I bumped
You
into
know,
Dan Rather one day. It was really the
did you?
funniest. Yeah, oh yeah.
Wow.
I have an incredible life here in New York City, man. You know,
Yeah, man,
I
I
call
lived there
it
for 20
brushes
years.
with greatness. And on that day,
Yeah.
I had two brushes with greatness. I went to hear a lecture by Charlton Heston on
Hmm.
his life and career, and
Yeah.
he was marketing a book, the Bible. He'd gone to the
Yeah.
Holy Land, visited all the sites, so
Right.
I got a book signed, and I was thrilled. You know, like
And you
Ben-Hur,
bumped into
Alcide,
Dan.
Moses. You know, I met him. I shook hands with him. As a matter of fact, I became friends with him, and we
Oh, that's awesome.
corresponded for 10 years.
No kidding.
From well, yeah, almost 10 years, from 1997 to the time
Hmm.
of his passing. So I get in the elevator at the Marriott Hotel. That's a very modern
Yeah,
hotel in New York. It's really got great elevators. It has glass walls,
that's
and
right.
you're
Yeah.
going past the floors and you're seeing all the floors. So I get down and I'm really starstruck at this moment. I met Charlton Heston. I shook hands with
Right.
Charlton Heston and I go, wow, this is great. The door opens and I see two very shiny shoes, a lady in a gown, and a guy in a tuxedo. And I look up and it's Dan Rather. And I went, I mean,
Two in
just a
one day.
surprise. I said, Dan Rather. And he went, oh, he
Yeah.
got scared. And and the lady looked at him and she looked at me and I have a smile on his face and he's
Right.
angst ridden, you know.
Yeah. He's like, oh God. Yeah.
He's angst
Yeah.
ridden. And you know why?
That's great.
Because a couple of years before somebody had stalked him and broken his
Oh
nose.
yeah.
Remember that? Listen,
Traumatized. Yeah.
a guy stalked him, waited for him outside CBS Studios. When he came
Oh
out, the guy
man.
grabbed him, started punching him, broke his nose, and he kept
Jeez.
saying, "What's the frequency, Kennedy? What's the frequency, Kennedy?" He
What?
kept
That's what the dude
reciting
was
that.
saying?
And
Oh my
then
God.
when Dan Rather told the cops the story, he said, "Oh, he kept saying, 'What's the frequency, Kenny? What's the frequency, Kenny?'" But all the witnesses like,
Oh,
no, he wasn't saying Kenny.
he's
He
saying
was saying
Kennedy.
Kennedy. The
Wow.
same guy, a couple of years later, went to Rockefeller Center and he gunned down a whole bunch of newsmen. The
I
same
smell
guy that beat up
MKUltra.
Dan Rather picked up an AR-15 and he took it out on the media.
Jesus.
So he obviously had a
That
very
sounds
deep
like
grudge. So I thought,
MKUltra.
like, oh, I know
Yeah.
when he's acting that way. He thinks I'm going to ask him, what's the
Right.
frequency, Kennedy?
My God.
I did. I just smiled
Um,
and I said, man, what a
yeah.
coward, you know? And that's
My
what
friend,
cowards are.
go we're a little low on time, but I know maybe just I don't know if we have time to get into the slides. We may just have to do this again, but I would love to hear. I know you've made some recent discoveries
Yeah.
that you were mentioned. I mean, I would love for
Yes.
you.
Let me see.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to share a few of them.
Okay. Let me try. I think I have, yeah, I have it right here. This is the memorandum
Oh,
that we're talking about that connects James Jesus Angleton with Mossad and a secret file that they had
mm-hmm.
where Angleton was reporting um, to the CIA, to the FBI, and using Israeli intelligence services. That's what's circled here. You can find the document in the new treasure trove
Yep.
of information that's come out.
Mm-hmm.
Let me
I just
see how it
I
connects.
posted something about it on one of my sites. Yeah.
Yeah, memorandum.
Yeah.
United States of America. See, this is Mr. William C. Sullivan
Mm-hmm.
to D.J. Brennan, Central Intelligence Agency, CIA information received from James Angleton. That is going to be one of the biggest finds that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the picture isn't loading, so let me see if I can just run a couple of minutes of this conversation that I had with Dr. John
Okay.
Brandenburg, showing him this discovery that I made last week in the Athena photographs. So now let me show you a couple more pictures.
Show me some. Show me the moon goddess.
The moon goddess is in the other room. The moon goddess is in the other room.
Okay.
So here we're going to go to the next picture, and it's going to be very quick.
I'm going to cut to the chase and show you
I'm going
this
to cut to
picture.
the chase and show
And
you
this
this
is the one.
picture. they found
And this is
intriguing.
okay.
The reason that caught my attention was this iridescent rainbow. Now remember,
Iridescent rainbow.
yeah, well, all rainbows are iridescent. That's what iridescent means.
Sure.
Right.
Iridescent.
So, but the point is, remembering that annular eclipse created all those rainbow colors. I looked at this, it reminded me of that, and I was intrigued by this photograph. So I decided to enhance it. And what I was trying to enhance was this area here so I could identify
Sure.
each of these craters and explore it. You know, that's what we do. It looks flat and gray, but when you really get in there and you start to adjust contrast, brightness, gamma, sharpness, etc., you can bring more details out. You can feel the relief. For example, most people, upon seeing this photograph, would think it's basically a gray plaster kind of surface. But when you start to go in and see the shadows, you can see the canyons, you can see the depressions. And
Beautiful. I will mention that several of the astronauts commented that the lunar landscape was actually had this very subtle color changes depending on which angle you looked at it, so that on the way back from the moon, these guys are, obviously happy, and they're heading back for Earth, and the thing they chattered the most about was the colors of the moon.
it was
Had
never
different opinions and saw a slightly different color in the lunar soil and rocks.
Right? Yeah. Well, John, here's an interesting question. Why don't we see that from Earth? And I have a very easy answer.
What's that?
Well, they always say, well, if what you say is true and the moon has different colors, well, why can't we see them? And I say to people, why is the sky blue? And of course, people who know say, okay, but the atmosphere filters out the blue light, and we see filters out everything but the blue light. I said,
Yeah.
Right. Now I say, where does the atmosphere go at night?
It doesn't go anyplace.
It doesn't go anywhere. And guess what? It's doing the same thing at night to moonlight that it does to sunlight during the day, filtering out everything except that silver, blue, gray.
Yeah, we're actually looking at the moon through kind of a color filter.
Exactly. And that's my answer to it. And, that's the right answer. Just like asking the question, Dr. Brandenburg, what's right about a right angle? I'll give you 5 seconds.
Give me 5 seconds to say, well, right angles are all right,
I love those. This. Remember the Sphinx asked the riddle, and if you didn't answer the riddle, it killed you.
Yeah.
Well, what's right about a right angle? 90 degrees.
90 degrees. Yeah, right.
Okay. Let me show the picture one more time.
Yeah.
I'm going to analyze the one that I'm waiting to show you. What happened to this picture when I equalized it and improved contrast and gamma, etc. So there is the original, and the tip-off was this. So the next stage is this one, and
oh, for heaven's sakes! Look at how it's changed because of the aspect of the lighting.
Exactly. And I think so. Somebody might want to argue, oh, that's a lens flare. This is not a lens flare.
No.
And I'll show you something remarkable, John.
What's that?
I'll do one more operation, or maybe two, which is inverted. And here, by changing the colors, we can see some more details.
Yes.
And embedded in there are these spheres that proceed from it. And I wanted to show you, would you agree with me, perhaps, that
why are the striations there? That's very interesting. I've never seen that.
I agree. I think that we're watching.
I can't believe that that's a lens effect. that's anyway, it's very peculiar. It looks almost like like solar wind or something.
Solar wind with carrying
Plasma.
plasma with it. That's what I say.
Right. Well, the moon is going right through part of the most dynamic part of the Earth's magnetic field and its connection with the solar wind.
Yes.
The Earth's magnetic field is getting blown like a flag flapping in the wind from the sun, which it puts out this plasma wind, and that takes the magnetic lines of force and actually stretches them and pulls them. And then every once in a while, a bunch of the magnetic lines of force break off and form this, what's called a plasmoid, which is this island of magnetic field being swept out into the outer solar system. So it's all very dynamic. And of course, when that break off occurs, that triggers a bunch of charged particles to come down and go back to the Earth, following the magnetic lines of force, and light up the north and south poles of the aurora. So
Yes.
it's all a big light show.
Yes. Well, I think you've answered the question. I think we're looking at magnetic streams, solar wind, magnetic streams, and we're seeing.
Looks like, that's
plasma.
what it looks like.
These concentrations here.
Look
at these concentrations here. There's no explanation. There is no explanation for these round bubbles, I would call them.
Well, plasmas. One of the reasons I went into plasma physics, of course, was to harness fusion power. That's my great dream of but also to unify gravity and electromagnetism, which is, if you treat everything as a plasma, then all matter is electrodynamic, and then you could make an electrodynamic theory of gravity. But
yes,
what you find is that the plasmas all have structures in them. They're not just just like the aurora has all of these curtains of light and starbursts, and then of course they discovered that earthly thunderstorms are shooting vast jets of plasma way up into space.
Oh yes, I designated the equinox today, March 21st, 2025, as the day when I would release this to the public. And Faust, you're the person I chose to send it to the world.
Thank you, my friend. I'm honored.
Aside from for PhD scientists, physicists, theoretical physicists, geologists, Dr. John Brandenburg, he was the deputy director of the U.S. Navy Clementine Moon Mapping Project. So he's the foremost expert on the moon and plasma physics. He's the first person I turned to when I brought that out. Again, that's an example to you of the work that I do. It says computer enhancement, geometric analysis. You saw it right there. And you folks are the first people, among the first people on Earth to see the solar wind. And I'm very happy to share that with you. I don't think
and if you want to see more of
on
Robert's,
the equinox, what could be better to see?
It's a perfect
than to see the solar wind on the equinox.
Amazing. We've christened the day. Listen, Robert does incredible work. If you guys want to see some of the photo analysis work he's done, check out my first podcast with him. We go through some of his most incredible discoveries about the not only the moon but Mars, and it's just, this work is just it is out of this world extraordinary. So I can't recommend it enough. Robert, I'm so grateful for your time, man. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and we are kindred souls.
We're brothers in arms,
and it's
That's
amazing
what we
to
are.
talk to you. Yes, we are. I appreciate you so much, and I'm wishing you all the best. And
Likewise.
I'm sure we'll be in touch. Maybe we'll do this again in the future.
Likewise.
Thank you again, Robert. You take care. Have a great weekend and a great.
You too.
Week. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the golden age.
For everyone listening, Robert. That's right. Listen, Robert, if they want to follow you, they follow you on Substack, right?
Yeah, all the information is at the end of every article on Substack. robertmorningstar.substack.com. I think it's the easiest website URL that I've ever had. Just my name, no space,
Yeah.
.substack.com. And I'm very proud of this article that you will see the 2 pages of the zipper file, the file that was kept by the Deputy Director of Clandestine Operations, Robert Trumbull
Oh.
Crowley. He kept it till the end of his days, and the weight of conscience and solitary knowledge compelled him to share them with
Mm.
Gregory Douglas, the author of Regicide, who sent them to the U.S. Marine sniper, who sent it to another U.S. Marine helicopter pilot, who contacted me, and we brought James Files
Wow.
uh, into the public. James Files had a
Nice.
Christic experience in jail. Christ appeared to him, and he reformed. And he was released from
Wow.
jail from a 50-year sentence after serving 26 years. And after that conversion, he confessed. And I am very proud to say that on Easter Sunday of 2023, James Files confessed to the world on my show on Revolution Radio, the Morningstar Report. It's on Sundays at 3 o'clock on Studio A, 3 o'clock Eastern. And I will forever be proud of that and also grateful. It's hard to believe. I searched for the killer of President Kennedy, 62 years. Then he
Yeah.
was brought to me. And in the end, I have nothing but sadness,
Yeah.
compassion, because he was tortured. He's an evil
Yeah.
villain. They took him at the age of 8, and they
Wow.
mind controlled him, tortured him for 10 years. At 18, he was taken and put in the U.S. Army. He became a jungle fighter, a killer, and the CIA said, this guy's great. Let's put him in
Yeah.
Chicago, embed him with the Mafia, and he can do
And then he
jobs for
was one of
both
the
of
many
us. It's a
sent over
really a tragic
to
story,
shoot
but
Jackie. Yeah.
I, I,
Yeah.
I'm flabbergasted. I call him and I talk to him, and I respect him. It's hard to say that.
Yeah.
For his
No,
truthfulness. At
but
the
it's
end of his life, he's come clean, and the emphasis is
yeah,
on clean. A clean conscience.
man, that's the
So I'm happy
the
to share
mark
that
of an
with you.
enlightened soul
Yeah.
is the ability to forgive. And
All right.
I believe you are one of those souls, my friend. So God bless you. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. If you're listening on Spotify, drop us a review. iTunes, we appreciate all of them. We thank you.
Okay.
All
Bye.
right, Robert. Thank you so much,
Take
brother.